Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. It was just last spring when my buddy, let's call him Max, and I started our annual tradition of helping each other with property cleanups. We'd tackle everything from removing damaged trees to prepping garden plots and dealing with our weed-infested yards. I was up first for the cleanup detail, so I spent that Friday evening getting everything ready for the big day. I sharpened tools, tuned up the chainsaw, and even gave the lawnmower blade a good once-over. As part of my prep, I mixed some gas with 2-cycle oil for the small engines. It was pretty late when I finished, so I just put everything away for the next day. Saturday morning, Max shows up around 8 a.m. with coffee and breakfast sandwiches. We're sitting on his truck's tailgate, enjoying our meal, when my neighbors drive by in their beat-up Toyota Corolla. This thing was smoking like a chimney. We'll call them Ricky and Moose. Damn, Max chuckled. Bet they go to the gas station and fill up with oil instead of gas. I laughed. Yeah, and probably check the gas while they're at it. We finished our breakfast and got to work, but when I went to grab the gas cans, they were nowhere to be found. That's when it hit us. Ricky and Moose's car was smoking so bad because they'd helped themselves to my gas. Can you believe this? I fumed. They straight up stole our gas. Max shook his head. That's low, man. What are we gonna do now? We ended up having to go shopping for new gas cans, gas, and more 2-cycle oil. When we got back, we saw Ricky and Moose cruise by a few times, but we managed to get a lot done despite the setback. The next weekend was dedicated to cleanup at Max's place. A couple of weekends later, we had a family dinner at my wife's grandparents' place, who also happened to be Ricky and Moose's grandparents. Toward the end of the night, most people had left, and I was chatting with my wife's grandfather when nature called. As I was in the bathroom, I spotted a gas can with very distinct paint on it. When I got back, I asked the old man, "Hey, where'd you get that gas can in the bathroom?" He replied, "Oh, Ricky and Moose left it here. Why?" "That's actually mine," I explained, along with another one they took. I loaded both cans into my truck, but the whole situation kept eating at me every time I saw that smoking car go by. So I came up with a plan. I went out and bought a few gallons of gas, some diesel fuel, and various oils. I mixed up a special concoction in my new 6-gallon gas can. That evening, I made sure to mow the lawn when I knew Ricky and Moose would see me, using some clean gas for the mower. Then I accidentally left the can with my special mix out overnight. The next morning, I left for work without checking on the can. When I got home, my wife greeted me with a grin. "Your plan must have worked," she said. "I watched Ricky and Moose go in and out with their car. It was not only smoking, but sputtering like crazy. The last time they drove out, they didn't come back." About an hour later, there was a knock at the door. It was Ricky and Moose. "Hey man," Ricky said, looking worried. "Can you take a look at our car? It's acting up real bad." Moose chimed in. "Yeah, and if you can't fix it, maybe you could tow it home for us?" I feigned exhaustion. "Sorry guys, I've had a long day and I've got a killer migraine. Maybe tomorrow?" Their faces fell. Ricky stammered, "But we don't have insurance and it's on the main road." I shrugged. "Tough luck, guys. Maybe you shouldn't take things that don't belong to you." The highway patrol ended up finding their car and had it towed. It would have cost them around $500 to get it out of impound, plus they needed current registration and insurance. The car wasn't worth it. But Ricky and Moose are the type of people who always seem to land on their feet. The pastor of a local church gave them an old Ford Taurus. It took me a few cans of my special gas, but after about a month I managed to get the engine to seize up. This time it quit right in their grandparents' yard. They scrapped the Taurus, and as luck would have it, they got their tax returns. They bought a nice-looking Chevy Silverado, but it wasn't long before it started having problems too. It smoked really bad. They finally took it to a mechanic who found the real problem. He got the truck running right again, but it cost them about $500. Since then, I haven't had any more gas come up missing. As I watched them drive by in their newly repaired truck, Max asked, "Think they learned their lesson?" I nodded. I sure hope so. Free gas isn't always as free as you think. The next one is an entitled people's story. I've always been a firm believer in the saying, "Don't judge a book by its cover." Little did I know that this belief would be put to the test in such a dramatic way at my own workplace. I'm the regional manager for a chain of upscale cafes. My job involves a lot of traveling to different locations, checking on the quality of service and making sure everything runs smoothly. I prefer to do these checks incognito. I dress casually and act like a regular customer. This way I get to see how the staff truly behaves when they don't think the boss is watching. One rainy Tuesday, I decided to visit our newest location in the city. I'd heard great things about it, but I wanted to see for myself. I threw on some old jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a worn-out jacket. My hair was a mess from the rain, and I probably looked like I'd just rolled out of bed. As I walked into the cafe, the smell of fresh coffee and pastries hit me. The place looked great, modern decor, soft lighting, and a cozy atmosphere. I approached the counter, already impressed with what I saw. That's when I met Sarah, the waitress who would soon regret her actions. Sarah glanced up from the register, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. Her welcoming smile quickly turned into a look of disdain. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone far from friendly. "Yes, I'd like a cappuccino and one of those blueberry muffins, please," I said, pointing to the display case. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Sir, I think you might be in the wrong place. Our prices are clearly displayed, and I'm not sure if—" I cut her off. "I can read the prices just fine, thanks. I'd like to order, please." She huffed, clearly annoyed. "Look, this is a high-end establishment. We have a certain clientele. Maybe you'd be more comfortable at the diner down the street." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was she really trying to kick me out because of how I looked? "Excuse me?" I said, my voice level but firm. "Are you refusing to serve me?" Sarah straightened up, putting on an air of authority. "Sir, I have the right to refuse service to anyone. Your attire doesn't meet our standards, and you're making other customers uncomfortable. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." I looked around. The few other customers in the cafe seemed more interested in their phones or conversations than in me. "I don't see anyone looking uncomfortable except you," I replied. "I'd like to speak to your manager." Sarah smirked. "I am the manager on duty. Now please leave before I have to call security." At this point, I was torn between revealing my identity and seeing how far she'd take this. Curiosity won out. "All right," I said, holding up my hands in mock surrender. "I'll go, but I'd like your full name first." "It's Sarah Johnson," she said proudly, as if expecting me to recognize her name. "And don't bother trying to complain. I have the full support of the regional manager." I nodded, hiding a smile. "Thanks, Sarah. Have a nice day." As I walked out, I could hear her muttering something about riffraff under her breath. Little did she know her day was about to take a turn for the worse. I went back to my hotel, changed into my usual work attire, a crisp suit and tie, and headed straight back to the cafe. It was time for Sarah to learn a valuable lesson. When I walked in, Sarah was busy wiping down tables. She looked up, her eyes widening as she recognized me from earlier. Before she could say anything, I approached her. "Hello, Sarah," I said calmly. "I believe we have some things to discuss. Is there somewhere private we can talk?" Sarah's face had gone pale. Yes, we can use the back office." As we walked to the office, I could see her hands shaking slightly. Once inside, I closed the door and turned to face her. "Sarah, do you know who I am?" I asked. She shook her head, looking increasingly nervous. I pulled out my company ID. "I'm John Thompson, the regional manager for this chain of cafes, the same regional manager whose full support you claimed to have earlier." Sarah's jaw dropped. She started stammering. I held up a hand to stop her. "I came here today to do a routine check on our newest location. I dress casually during these visits to see how our staff truly treats customers. Needless to say, I'm extremely disappointed with what I experienced." Sarah's eyes were brimming with tears now. "Mr. Thompson, I'm so sorry, I didn't know—" "That's exactly the point, Sarah," I interrupted. "You didn't know who I was, but that shouldn't matter. Every customer, regardless of how they're dressed or how much money you think they have, deserves to be treated with respect." I paused, letting my words sink in. Sarah looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her up. "Our company prides itself on providing excellent service to all our customers," I continued. "What you did today goes against everything we stand for. You judged me based solely on my appearance and tried to throw me out of the cafe. What if I had been a food critic or a potential investor? Even if I was just an ordinary person looking for a good cup of coffee, your behavior was unacceptable." Sarah nodded, wiping away tears. "I understand, sir. It won't happen again." "You're right, it won't," I said firmly, "because as of this moment, you're suspended without pay for 2 weeks. During that time, you'll be required to attend our company's customer service training program. If you successfully complete the program and show a genuine change in attitude, you may return to your position. If not, we'll have to terminate your employment. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded again, looking thoroughly chastised. Yes, sir, I understand. I'm truly sorry for my behavior. I softened my tone slightly. Sarah, everyone makes mistakes. What matters is how we learn from them. I hope this experience teaches you to treat every person with kindness and respect, regardless of their appearance. That's not just good business, it's being a decent human being. With that, I left Sarah to process what had happened. I spent the rest of the day at the cafe, observing the other staff members and making notes for improvements. To their credit, the rest of the team provided excellent service. As I was leaving, Sarah approached me one last time. Mr. Thompson, she said quietly, I just wanted to say thank you for giving me a second chance. I've learned my lesson and I promise it won't happen again. I nodded, appreciating her sincerity. I'm glad to hear that, Sarah. Remember, our cafes are meant to be welcoming spaces for everyone. Make sure you embody that spirit when you return. In the weeks that followed, I kept a close eye on that location. Sarah returned from her suspension a changed person. She was polite and welcoming to every customer regardless of their appearance. Her colleagues noticed the change, and it had a positive effect on the entire team's performance. This experience reminded me why I love my job. Yes, it's about running successful cafes, but it's also about creating spaces where people feel valued and respected. Sometimes it takes a hard lesson to drive that point home, but in the end, it makes us all better, both as professionals and as human beings. As for me, I still do my incognito visits, but now, whenever I walk into one of our cafes in my casual clothes, I can't help but smile, wondering if I might run into another Sarah. Hopefully, though, they'll have learned the lesson without needing a suspension to drive it home. The next one is a petty revenge story. Uncle back in the 90s had 2 restored cars, 1969 Firebird, his first and most cherished car, and a 1969 Chevelle Blue with white racing stripes. Both cars show ready. His wife was caught cheating, so a divorce happened. When he got his agreement to sign, she demanded that she wanted the Camaro. Well, they didn't own a Camaro yet. He drove that hot rod Chevelle to a local grocery store parking lot and waited. Finally, some young high school kid pulled up and my uncle made his year. Traded that kid even for his beat-up Camaro, went home and signed the divorce papers. After the judge signed off and the divorce was finalized, they met in the parking lot and she was given her Camaro. She was trying to duck him out of his prized and cherished car, but thankfully due to her thinking it was a Camaro, he easily kept it. He still has the Firebird. I'd say this qualifies because he just threw away a crap ton of cash he invested in that Chevelle, especially in today's market, just to match her pettiness. He expected her to want the Chevelle. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This isn't my story, it was a close friend of a then close friend. I'm not sure how I never thought about sharing it, as it is one of the best malicious compliance stories I've ever heard. There's also quite a bit of background here, mostly to explain old tech. This guy, we'll call him G, was pretty wealthy. Dude had a NEPO job where he worked in a factory fixing the machinery which almost literally never broke. Someone always had to be on duty to be ready for repairs, so he got all kinds of overtime and was being paid almost $75 per hour in the early 00s. To give you an idea of the kind of money he was making and how he didn't care, he spent most whole days sitting around watching movies on a personal laptop that he had spent over $2,000 on and just left it at his desk. If he had a call to the floor, it would take him no more than an hour, and that would happen maybe 3 times in a week. Holidays were 2.5x pay, and he worked every one of them. This guy was a bit of a tech nerd, and he got an ISDN account as soon as it came out. For you youngins or folks who weren't savvy at the time, ISDN was basically 2 56.6 kbps modems smushed together. This was back when 56.6k was as good as it got for residential, and you could still pay for slower. So, fast AF for its day. Back in the days of dial-up, the dark ages, some services would be paid by the minute of usage in addition to your monthly bill, and that's how this worked. Also, because dial-up was literal and used existing infrastructure, you could take your modem with you and use it somewhere else by logging into your account from a new location and dialing the closest number to you. This was also back in the day of long-distance charges. Now for the actual story. G just got his ISDN modem and after a day or so took it to his brother's house one town over to show him how fast it was, and after they played around on the internet for a bit, G had to go to work and he would be doing some long shifts for the next couple of days, so his brother asked to borrow his modem, which G said was fine. I don't understand exactly how it happened, but his brother had signed into a long distance number and then forget to shut the connection down. And then G got his first month's bill. It was over $14,000. He immediately called the service provider and explained the situation, and they basically told him, "You signed a contract, sucks to suck, we want our money." He relented and set up a payment plan. He would also be required to keep the contract going until the bill was fully paid. Now, if you've never even heard of ISDN, even if you're 30 plus years old, I don't blame you. This was a very short-lived technology and was replaced by DSL just a couple years later, but unlike ISDN, DSL required new infrastructure, and for some reason I don't fully understand, but I have guessed is probably the way some important switch on the service provider's network was set up. The two services could not coexist in the same small regions the size of like a neighborhood. And G lived in a pretty nice neighborhood, not mansions, but upper middle class. The best neighborhood our small town had to offer, in fact, and people just wanted DSL. It was the first time the internet was getting close to recognizable as it is today, because it was so much faster than what was previously available. The folks in this neighborhood wanted those speeds and did not like being told that they couldn't have it. So, service provider calls up G and explained the situation and offered to waive the remaining amount of the bill. G told them the whole bill was bullcrap and asked if they would refund what he had already paid, but they just told him to go duck himself. Key malicious compliance. G tells them he has a contract and points out that they are obligated to fulfill their end of the contract and he will be paying his bill in full, and hung up. He keeps paying. Service provider keeps getting calls from more customers wanting DSL and folks who had previously called, calling back more and more irate. G gets another call, then another, until service provider decides to just tell people exactly who is responsible for their neighborhood's lack of DSL service. His neighbors let loose on him, but does G care? Not at all. Just keeps paying his bill. This went on for more than a year. Eventually, service provider just decided to get rid of ISDN completely, as it was a legitimately outdated technology, and did forgive the remainder of G's bill since they weren't fulfilling their end of their contract, but the whole thing was just wonderful. The next one is an entitled people's story. I'm a 22 years old male, British man, living in the fine town of Hereford, known mostly for cows and an army base, and my friend is about 3 years older than me. I'll call her MM, and I have known each other since high school. We were placed in the same special needs unit as we were both on the autism spectrum. Had the same bully, but we didn't speak much until my second year 8 for us fellow Brits, where she showed us a sacred series that bonded us together, a little thing called Yu-Gi-Oh!, the abridged series. We watched that all the time when we had allocated computer time, laughing and going episode to episode. She left high school about 3 years before me, but she and I swapped numbers to keep in contact. She's the only high school friend who I've kept up with other the years, and one of the only friends I made in high school. Every weekend we would call and chat for about an hour. Sometimes we would even go out to eat. M was a vegetarian, so we usually stuck to familiar places that did pizzas or Italian food. From Pizza Hut to Pizza Express, RIP, this tradition continued through COVID and even up until I got my apprenticeship working for my local NHS hospital. Shortly after, M and I agreed to meet up on Sunday and go out to eat at one of our local Italian places. We ate in her mom's car because the restaurant was full and had a few loud children. Sensory issues are a idiot sometimes. Afterwards, we went to a chocolate shop for dessert. Here's where things get weird. Em and I show up and there's a man with his dog at the front counter. Now I know, a dog in a chocolate place is a recipe for disaster, right? But no, the place we went to had a dogs allowed policy, and all the chocolate was boxed up and out of reach, so who am I to say anything? M, however, sees the dog owner as public enemy number 1 and mutters something to me. "Why does that man have a dog in here?" she said in a very annoyed tone. Before I can stop her, she storms over and began demanding him to muzzle his dog or keep it outside while he was in here. Something about hair getting in the food? IDK. The dog looked lovely and well-groomed. The man, rightfully annoyed, left before she turned her ire to the cashiers, who explained their dog policy, before she just retreated and went to pick out some chocolate for herself. Now, I didn't say anything initially because I didn't want my friend to perceive it as a challenge, so I just meekly apologized to the cashiers and brought a chocolate sundae before we left. M started explaining that she believed all dogs were aggressive and could turn at any time, and that their hair could get in the food and trigger allergies, which she had. I just awkwardly explained that he wasn't doing anything wrong and we dropped it. A few weeks later, I have one of my weekly calls with M. She immediately launched into telling me about another doggy story. She was at a garden center with her mother to admire the plants when she saw a dog doing its business. Before the man could even bend over to pick up the doo-doo, she immediately said, "I hope you're going to pick that up." According to my friend, the man chased her around yelling or something. IDK how much I trust that, and she had to get away from him in time for her mum to come back from the toilet. At this point, I tried to be blunt and explain that she couldn't just go around ordering people how to raise their dogs, and that dogs are only aggressive if the owners are bad, abusive people. For context, my family have owned 4 dogs over the time I've been alive, including a German Shepherd, infamously one of the most aggressive dog breeds people think of. He was a lovely, protective friend who we eventually gave to a new home for no bad reasons, mind. Additionally, M said that dog feces are toxic to plants, and I tried to explain that they weren't any more than human excrement. And while it's true that some dog owners don't clean up, most do. She kept trying to double down, and I just said I was ending the call early. I needed a break from her and to ask my mum what to do next. We do eventually get back in contact and she apologizes. I just say to not bring up dog-related incidents to me because I will no longer be getting involved. Reason I bring this up now is because M recently reached out to meet up again. Our regular haunt might be closing down soon, so she wants to go for old time's sake. Mum and I were talking this morning about her past behavior, and at work I thought about it. I told my mum that if she tried to pull something, I would intervene once more. Ask her to stop, and if she didn't, I would call my parents and go right back home and probably just say to her that I need a break. It's probably not as flashy as other posts on here, but I just figured I'd air this to get it out my system. Thanks for reading. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.